The objective we'll get to in a little bit, but if you want to, you can go ahead and start looking at it now. Yeah, lamb sauce. The base is raw. I like that one too. I can't say the real quote, of course, because we're at school and I can't say things that Gordon Ramsay says. But yeah, it's great stuff. Okay, so we're moving on from homeostasis today to look at the actual mechanisms of how the molecules go across the cell membrane. We're still talking about homeostasis. We're just looking at the mechanisms behind it. Ooh, Zari's optimistic. That's good to hear. Seeing a lot of green chili. That's nice. Okay, let's go ahead and get to our do now. Like I said before, our do nows are now going to be part of our forms things. So there's an assignment you'll notice that says 11.10 do now. So make sure that you make your way to assignments. Click on the do now there. And here we go. Give me a second, I'll put the link in the chat box as well. And there we go. Hi, Grace. Optimistic, Zaria, means that you are hopeful about the future, that you believe that everything will be okay. That's pretty cool, Clint. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but yeah, he is an artist, and food is his canvas. And Timothy, if you don't know idiot sandwiches, you gotta look it up. It's pretty great.
You're killing us.
Hmm?
You're killing us.
Green chili, sounds good. Hi, Avery. Miguel, I think I probably agree with you. I think he's probably my favorite celebrity too. Okay, I think I'm all caught up. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear you're also feeling optimistic, Faye. I think I'm probably right there with you. Not to make it too adult, but I think the last couple of years have been a little rough. I'm feeling optimistic about the future, though.
Can't wait for the future.
Yeah, me too. And Hugo, make sure that you're going to the link in the assignments tab, because that's where the question is posted. Thank you, Zaria. That's okay, Kaylin. Nice job, Jacob. Hi, Casey. Yeah, remember that our do nows are now being tracked through forms, so make sure that you go to assignments and you click the link there. I'll go ahead and put the link one more time in the chat box. About a minute and a half left. Thank you, Josiah. The reason we're doing this is we're going over some old questions in preparation for our mock star next month. I'm at 19 responses, so I'm still missing quite a few. Make sure that you're going to that link for our do now. Let me give you another minute. Let me go back here. Whoop, nope. There we go. Again, your do now, your participation in the chat box, your exit tickets are all a part of your daily grade. Please make sure that you are completing those. When you're asked a question, you're writing in the chat box. When we have our do nows and exit tickets, you're going to the appropriate form. And make sure that you are answering questions in the chat box when asked. Thank you, Faye. 30 more seconds for those of you still working. Still missing a good 10 responses or so. Make sure that if you are here, you have gone to assignments, you have clicked on the tab or the do now. Thank you, Davian. All right, very good. So, can I get someone to come on mute and read the question for me, please?
I got it, Mr. Martinez.
Go for it, Dominic.
You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Adult mountain lions are almost 2 meters long. They have black spot over each eye. The common names used throughout the United States for this species are listed below. That right?
Mm-hmm. And then the question it's bolded.
Why is it best for scientists to use the name from standardized taxonomic I can't say that word system?
Thank you, Dominic.
System.
So, if you don't mind, Hugo, you answered the question even before you were looking at the answers. Would you mind coming off mute and explaining your answer that you put first? If you didn't hear me, I was asking for Hugo to come off mute and explain the answer that he put first. Sorry, I got a little loud there for a second. Let me see if I can find it because I like what you wrote. Okay, here's what Hugo said. He said, in order to have a universal name / scientific name so people from different places could know what animal is being talked about, which is exactly what the answer was, right? So looking at our answer choices, we looked here, we got standardized name differentiates mountain lions and pumas, a little too specific. Standardized name is less descriptive of the animal that has been observed. True, but not necessarily applicable. C, communication with other scientists about mountain lions will be reduced. I mean, I guess, maybe. And then finally, D, all scientists will be using one name for mountain lions. And that's it, right? Why is it best for scientists to use the name for the standardized taxonomic system? It's that it's standardized, so that it's the same across, everything. So whenever a scientist is talking about mountain lion, everybody knows what they're talking about. Because I guarantee you, somebody from, Florida is not going to really know what a Wisconsin puma is, and somebody in Wisconsin might not know what a Texas panther is, right? All these crazy names for the same thing makes it very difficult to keep track of something. So if you all have the same name for it, it becomes much easier to talk about. Alrighty. So in case you don't remember, binomial nomenclature is the way that we talk about animals and how we classify them. So does anybody remember this classification system here on the right? Does anybody want to talk us through it real quick? That's okay, Tatiana. Ooh, nobody. Just this stuff right here. Where's my pointer? Just this. I want someone just to come off mute and say this right here. Colorful words.
Say what?
These words right here.
Species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom.
Thank you so much, Denise. Even though you're having a rough day, you still come out to help me. Thank you. So this is how we organize things, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom was the broadest, right? That was the most things. So here, Homo sapiens can be a person. So the broadest category we fit into is animals, at least here with kingdom. If you remember going even further back, we actually fit into eukarya, which is the domain, but don't worry about that right now. So animals, right? We're in the animalian kingdom. Then phylum, class, order. Each one becomes more and more specific. So just like a pyramid, this kingdom here is at the base because it's the widest part, right? It has the most. And then the further up you go, the more and more specific it comes until it becomes what it is you're talking about. So here we have Homo sapien, which is the genus species name, and that is binomial nomenclature. So I know it's been a long time since we talked about taxonomy, but again, our mock star is coming up in December. It's going to cover everything, things that we talked about a long time ago and things that we have not talked about yet. So it's going to be a difficult test, I know, and I'm sorry that it's going to be difficult, but again, we use these mocks to kind of better understand the stuff that we missed and what we need to focus on going forward. That way, when it comes time for the star in April or May, we know exactly what we're going to be dealing with. Okay? Are there any questions about binomial nomenclature?
No questions.
All right, thank you, Brendan. Then let's move on. Can I get someone to read the objective for me, please?
Yeah, I got you.
Go for it.
Students will be able to compare and contrast active transport and passive transport.
Very good. Thank you, Brandon. So if you remember, these are the key points that we talked about yesterday when we were talking about homeostasis. Can I get someone to come off mute and read these for me, please?
Homeostasis is keeping things the same, stable, or balanced. The cell membrane allows the cell to maintain homeostasis by controlling what enters and leaves the cell. The cell membrane is a semi-permeable, also called selective permeable, which means only certain things can enter and leave the cell. The cell membrane needs to be selective so that it can keep certain materials in and other materials out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Denise. If you can, give her a clap or a snap or something just to say how grateful you are. I'm going to give her 2 claps. Thank you so much. So again, this was talking about homeostasis, which you mentioned yesterday, which is about balance, right? Trying to keep things stable. Remember, if you get too hot, you start to sweat. If you get too cold, you start to shiver. That's your body trying to maintain homeostasis. We see that even on a cellular level with these different processes with active and passive transport, which is what we're looking at today. And again, remember that the cell is selectively permeable because it wants to make sure that it's regulating what comes in and goes out. Okay, this is not super high yield for the star, but it is important that you see it at least once. Remember that the made up of 2 layers of lipids, which is called a bilayer of phospholipids. One side likes water, which is hydrophilic. One side doesn't, which is hydrophobic. The heads like water, the tails don't. So heads are hydrophobic. I'm sorry, the heads are hydrophilic, tails are hydrophobic. Okay, and then finally, can I read this one real quick?
I could read it.
Go for it.
The 3 biomolecules found in the cell membrane are proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Grace. So see here, we're missing nucleic acids, right? We're not talking about DNA. We're looking at the things that are embedded in.
Did you hear me?
I heard you. Thank you. The 3 biomolecules that we're finding in the cell membrane are going to be proteins, usually in the form of like channels, lipids, more usually in the form of the lipid bilayer, and then carbohydrates, which I mentioned yesterday briefly, is what kind of keeps the cell membrane fluid. We'll talk more about that later, but just remember that the carbohydrates there are usually cholesterol. So cholesterol helps the cell kind of keep its loose shape, so it can fit into different cavities and cells and vessels and whatever. Like I said, we'll get to that later. Okay, so this is the last thing we left on, which was diffusion and high concentration and low concentration. Now, we're going to really dive into this topic today because it's very important because this is super high yield for the star and a little bit tricky depending on how easily you pick it up. So let's talk about diffusion. Can I get someone to come off mute and read this slide for me, please?
I can read it.
Thank you, Casey.
Oh, okay. Diffusion is the movement of a substance from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Do you want me to read the second one?
Mm-hmm.
Diffusion happens naturally and does not require energy. It is a passive process.
Thank you. Okay, so diffusion. the thing that I mentioned the other day was with the Coke, right? That my dad would get us the Coke from Whataburger and he would dilute it with the water. So the Coke went from being kind of concentrated to being not concentrated, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about concentration. It doesn't mean thinking hard. I mean, it does, but in this context, diffusion literally means like how, I'm sorry, concentrated means how concentrated it is, like how many molecules there are. So the picture on the right is something you're probably pretty familiar with. Does anybody want to come on mute and explain what's happening in this picture on the right with the yellow food coloring?
Well, the food coloring is dispersing throughout the water.
Right, very good, Zaria. And how much energy is it taking for you to do that? Do you have to physically move those molecules around?
No, it's passive.
Very good, right? It's a passive process. If you've ever done this before, you take a watercolor, you put it into a glass of water, you can look at it as it diffuses across that entire glass, right? It's a passive process, which means it doesn't require any energy. As soon as you drop in that food coloring, it starts to disperse. Now, that food coloring is very concentrated, right? If you look at the vial of food coloring, it's going to be totally yellow. Then when you put it into the water, it becomes a lot brighter because it's being mixed with the water and the food coloring. So it's diffusing so that all the molecules are kind of spreading out. That's why you look here on the left, and you'll notice that initially all these red molecules are kind of clustered together, and they start to spread out. See, so they kind of start concentrated, and they start to find the edges of the space, and they move, and they move, and they move. This is diffusion. So it can happen with gas, it can happen with liquids, it can happen with whatever. The gas example I was using yesterday was with like perfume, right? So you spray that perfume into the air. Initially, it's just around you, but after a little bit, that whole perfume smell is like everywhere because it diffuses across the room. All those scented air particles kind of travel. Inside the perfume, right, it's very concentrated. It has all that perfume. So when you're spritzing it out, you're only spraying out a little bit. So it's going from a very high concentration inside the bottle, and when you spray it, it goes into a low concentration. Alrighty? Now, can I get someone to read this about passive transport?
I can read it for you.
Thank you, Zaria.
Passive transport, moving particles across a membrane without using any energy. There are three types of passive transport: homeostasis, simple diffusion, and encapsulated diffusion. Homeostasis is the movement of water. Simple diffusion is small particles like water and oxygen diffuse easily through the membrane. Encapsulated diffusion, some molecules pass through the channel proteins in the membrane.
Thank you, Zaria. So for those of you who don't speak Spanish, there's a word in Spanish, fácil, which means like easy. So here, what fácil is referring to is that it's making diffusion a little bit easier because let's say that when we talked about the other day, those molecules being too big to go through the membrane, there could be other things. Maybe they're too big, maybe it has a different charge, whatever. There are these proteins that are embedded inside the cell membrane that will allow it to go through. So that's why it's called facilitated, because it's making it a bit easier. So some things can diffuse all the way through, like water and oxygen, some steroid hormone. And there are some things that are too big, like glucose, that need help getting through. That's when you have facilitated. So passive transport. Passive does not require any energy. So even though those molecules are using a protein to go through the channel, think of it as like driving, if you've ever been on the road, like driving through like, I don't know, Chicago? No, not Chicago, Colorado. You have these big giant mountains. What they've done is instead of putting the roads like going all the way up the mountain and all the way down, they just blasted through the center of the mountain and you just kind of cross through. So it's like a channel, right? It's a tunnel that you kind of go through. It's the same thing here. The tunnel is not doing anything. The tunnel is just there. The tunnel exists. It's a big hole in the cell membrane, and the molecules can go through. Now, depending on what molecules go through is going to depend on, the way it's identified and more things you need to understand that are not applicable to the star. Just know that there are going to be these proteins that act as tunnels into the cell. That's called facilitated. And then like we talked about yesterday, with just regular diffusion, you have like molecules that kind of just pass through the membrane without any help, specifically water and oxygen. Now, does anybody think that they know why water and oxygen would be exceptions, that they wouldn't need help getting through the membrane? Why do you think oxygen and water wouldn't need help to get through the membrane? Anybody have any ideas?
Don't they just kind of like slide through, or I don't know.
They do. You're exactly right. Why do you think that oxygen and water specifically are able to get through without any kind of help?
Oxygen because it's like invisible, and water because it's like liquid, so it could just slide
Wait,
through.
so
the
is it
membrane.
because we need them to survive?
Hey, there you go. Grace, you were almost there, but Hugo got it, right? We need oxygen and water to live, like, immediately, right? So I mentioned the other day, if somebody was out running and they got some water, you can kind of feel that water, like, as soon as you start to drink it, you can kind of feel it spread throughout your body if you're really, really trying to feel it. Same thing with oxygen. Whenever you're out of breath, you take a big, deep breath, suddenly it's like, oh, there's air everywhere, right? So oxygen and water are able to kind of pass through quickly because we're evolved to be at that point, right? We need those molecules instantly. Like if you're dying of thirst, you need water now. If you drink water and it took an hour to process, then that's, it's not beneficial to you. You want to make sure you can get that stuff as quickly as possible. Same thing with oxygen. If you're without oxygen for a little bit, how good is it going to be if you, like, let's say that you were choking because there was no air, then all of a sudden there's all this air everywhere, but your body's like, you know what? Give me a little bit to kind of digest this oxygen and kind of figure out what to do with it. Well, no, right? You want to make sure that you can use that oxygen immediately. So those are things that can pass right through. They don't need help. They can just go on the way through. And then, of course, some are too big and they need help with the facilitated diffusion. Okay, now osmosis. Does anybody remember what osmosis looks at the flow of what molecule specifically?
What do you mean?
So when we're talking about osmosis, we're looking at a specific molecule moving across the membrane. So I'll go back here so you can see it one more time. So when we're looking at osmosis, what are we looking at?
Hypnosis.
No. Starts with a W, ends with a otter.
Water.
Water, there you go, right? We're looking at water. So osmosis specifically refers to the movement of water. It is a type of diffusion. So again, this is something that follows a natural process, goes from high concentration to low concentration. The only difference is that it's dealing with water. Does anybody think that they can explain what's going on in this picture?
What?
Ooh, nobody. Should I call on somebody and embarrass them?
Can I guess?
Go for it.
Is the water going through a semi-permeable membrane?
It is, and what is it trying to reach? I'll give you a hint. It starts with a, well, actually, it's right there.
Equilibrium?
Hey, what's another word for that? It starts with an H.
Homeostasis?
There you go, right? So water is doing the same thing that your body does, right? So if you're ever cold and you start to shiver to get warm, here we're looking at that on a very, very, very small scale. Here there's a membrane separating two things. One side has more water than the other side. So what water wants to do is it wants to equilibrate. It wants to get to a natural balance. So on one side where there's less water, and the other side where there's more water, the water's going to go from where there's more to where there's less. So here you see a bunch of water here, not a bunch of water here. The water wants to go in this direction. So the water starts to move here. You can see that with the numbers down there. And the water keeps going across this membrane until it reaches equilibrium, where there's the same amount of water on both sides. That is osmosis. So, boop. In the chat box, tell me in what direction the water is flowing and why. So here we have an image with something very similar to what we just saw. It's a little bit simpler. What I want you to do then, in the chat box, tell me in what direction the water is flowing and why. Try to use high and low concentration in your response. I know that the team's been super laggy today. If it's not working in the chat box, send me a private message. Again, we are monitoring you for your participation. So take a minute, use a high and low concentration in your response, and here we go. I think this one has no music, so it's going to be quiet. Hey, Timothy, nice. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the cell membrane with what's on the surface. But yeah, I'm glad you saw that. I think there was an article on that link I posted about the spike proteins. So I'm cool. I like that you saw that. And Casey, you're on the right path, but you're not quite there yet. Ooh, I like that, Josiah. Very nice. And to go back to Casey, you're right that it doesn't require any energy, but I am wanting to know in terms of concentration what's happening. Oh, is that a minute already? That was very fast. Let's go 1 more minute. I'm gonna. Oh, I can't. There we go. 1 more minute because that was kind of fast. I was thinking about how fast it was going to be. So again, in the chat box, tell me in what direction water is flowing and why. And tell me in terms of concentration. If you need a hint, there's some concentration junk down here.
Water direction.
In what direction?
I think it's going to the right.
Okay, why?
Because I'm seeing like all these bubbles of water are going to the right, but then I think they're like spreading everywhere and including through the cells.
Okay, but now explain it to me in terms of concentration. So you notice that there's a bunch of water on this side, right? That would mean that there is a high water concentration. Over here on the left, on the right side.
The one on the left, which means it will be a low one.
Okay, so then water going from left to right because it's going from a high concentration to a low concentration.
And it's going from high to low.
Man, that is a horrible sound. Okay. I was going to skip it. Sounds like a Star Trek thing. Okay. So what I put down for mine was that water flows to the right from high concentration, which is here. Where's my pointer? Here, high concentration to low concentration. Now, the reason that there is more water on this side than on this side is because you notice there's a bunch of green stuff on this side, right? We have something dissolved or also present in this water. So this is sugar. So this is a mix of sugar and water versus on this side is just water. So because there's pure water here and not pure water here, then it makes sense that there's more water here because this is 100% pure, right? This is not going to be 100% pure. So the water wants to go in this direction because it's going from high concentration, which again, this is 100%, and then it's going to go in this direction because this is not 100% water. This is a mix of water and sugar. So it's flowing from high concentration to low concentration across the membrane. There is a higher concentration of water on the left, so it flows to the right where there is less water. And I think I saw 1 or 2 responses that reflected this that I kind of liked. Let's see, Josiah's was very simple. The water is trying to go back and forth from high concentration to low concentration to keep the water molecules balanced, both in and out of the cell membrane, to then soon reach equilibrium. Very good. Josiah is actually picking up on a very advanced concept in the sense that this kind of happens back and forth. So if I go back to my other slide here, you'll notice that it kind of shows these arrows going in both directions. So nature is, it follows its own rules. It's not going to just go in one direction. Water is going to be going back and forth across the membrane constantly until it reaches that equilibrium. But that's kind of more advanced, what you need to know, so don't worry about it. But know that it is going in more than one direction. Oops, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. There we go. Okay, so high concentration to low concentration. Let me see what else y'all wrote. Thank you, Brighton. It's correct. Very good. You too, Miguel. And then Hamza said, I think it's going from high concentration to low concentration because there is not as much water on the low concentration as the high. Very good. By definition, that's what that means. So if there is a low concentration of something, that means that there's less of it. So less water, or a low water concentration means that there's less water. So let's go back to my Coke example with my dad. So if my dad was pouring that Coke into the little cup and filled it up with water, do you think the Coke was a high concentration or a low concentration? When my dad diluted the Coke in that little cup, do you think that was a high concentration of Coke or a low concentration? Dominic says low. Very good, right? Because my dad mixed it. He mixed the Coke with water and whatever other junk Whataburger put in there, right? So it's not really Coke anymore. It's like Coke plus water plus seltzer plus whatever, right? Whatever else they're putting in there. Remember that concentration means that it's like 100%, like it's only that thing. You might go to the store and see that some orange juice says that it's like, not from concentrate. That's kind of what that means as well. Did someone have a question? No? Okay. All right, so that's moving from high to low concentration. Let's move on. In the chat box, what biomolecules do you see in the image below? So we talked about this a little while ago. When we're talking about biomolecules, what are we seeing here in the cell membrane? So the chat box, let me know. Again, reminder, your chat box participation is your daily grade, so make sure that you are contributing. I know that we're probably real glitchy on Teams. So again, thank you for those of you who are sending messages privately. That's a good way to do it as well. So again, in the chat box, what I'm looking for, what biomolecules do you see in the image? Ooh, Brighton says he sees proteins. I like it. Very good. Remember that facilitated FOSSIL means to make it easy. These proteins are trying to make it easy. So thank you, Brighton. Hamza says the same thing, proteins. Very good. There's at least one other biomolecule present. Thank you, Zaria. Thank you, Brian. Josiah. Thank you, Nathaniel. But again, I will say there's at least one more biomolecule besides proteins here in this picture. Water and oxygen by themselves are not biomolecules. They do make up biomolecules, but by themselves they are not. Ooh, Casey wins. She got it. Phospholipids, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, super laggy. So we have the protein channel here. So this is protein. Then we also have our phospholipids. If you wanted to be real crazy, I also would have accepted maybe these are carbohydrates. They're not labeled or anything, so you don't know. But yeah, very good. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Miguel, Hugo. And yeah, Josiah, it could be carbohydrates. So remember the three biomolecules found in the cell membrane are proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Now, here's another example of this passive transport. Does anybody want to come off mute and explain high concentration to low concentration with this picture?
I can try, but I'll
Grace.
probably be wrong. But you said from high concentration to low concentration.
Uh-huh.
So like it's kind of like what you said on the perfume bottle. So it's kind of like how here it's like and the high concentration it's like more together, and then when it diffuses, like the low concentration is more spread out. I don't think I said it right, but yeah.
I think you're getting it though. You're very good, right? The high concentration means there's a whole bunch of things around, right? There's a whole bunch here, there's not as much here. So it wants to go from where there's a bunch to where there's a little. Here's another example you could think of. I'm even before the pandemic, I was kind of like not antisocial, but I kind of like my space. I don't want to be around much people. So imagine whenever you're going to like, I don't know, the mall, if you feel so inclined, and there's a whole big group of people coming towards you. It's like the last thing you want to do is like jump into this big group of people you don't know, right? If anything, you want to go in the other direction. You want to go from the high concentration of people to a low concentration. You look for a place where there's less people. For those of you who go to church and are also antisocial like me, there's there's all these pews filled with people. The one thing you want to do is find a seat that's not occupied. Like you want to find somewhere where no one is sitting. You want to try and go for a place where there's a lot of space, where you can kind of spread out and feel like, this is my area. That's how I am. It's the same thing with molecules. They want to find their own little space. So there's a whole bunch and they're all kind of crowded into one area. They want to kind of get away and move to a place where they can be by themselves because they want to get away from that high concentration and go to a low concentration. And you can use it with almost anything, right? So if there's ever a bunch of people around, you're like, oh, I got to go find my own space, right? That's going from a high concentration of people to a low concentration of people. Okay, now that was passive. This is active. Right off the bat, can anybody tell me some big differences between passive transport and what you see here with active transport? Ooh, Zaria, would you mind coming off mute and asking your question?
So I was just thinking, like, because it's always like high concentration to low concentration, and I understand like the cell is trying to even out and maintain homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to know if there was ever a scenario whereas there's, what did I say? That there's high concentration to low, low concentration to high.
So I'm glad you brought that up because what do you notice in the image here? Does it look the same as it did before?
No.
Here, look specifically over on this side, right? This side is kind of easy to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Would you call this the right side low concentration or high concentration?
That'll be low concentration.
Looks like low, right? There's not many things on this side. And yet they are going from a low concentration to a high concentration. So this is the opposite of what we just saw with passive. This is active transport. So what's the big difference you see between that? Aside from low to high concentration, what do you notice here that was not in passive?
They're using ATP, which is basically energy.
You got it. Genius. So thank you, Zaria. If you remember from a while back, we talked about ATP energy. So here we see that to go in the opposite direction from low concentration to high concentration, you need energy to do that. So let's go back to my perfume example. We sprayed the perfume in the air. The whole room is filled with that perfume molecules. Imagine trying to take all those molecules and shove them back into that perfume container, right? We're going from a low concentration to a high concentration. It's probably not impossible, but it would require a crazy amount of energy to do it, right? Imagine trying to hunt down every single one of those perfume molecules and try and shove them back into a bottle. It'd be very, very hard, right? In the same way, if you were trying to like cross a whole bunch of people, like if you've ever been in one of those really big cities and there's like all these people coming towards you and you have to like go through them, it takes a lot of energy to kind of go from your low concentration through them, which is a high concentration, right? It requires a lot of energy. So let's see, Cameron said ATP energy powers activate transport, forcing the molecules to go against the concentration gradient, which is low to high concentration, requiring energy. Fantastic. I was just about to mention that. So there's something called the concentration gradient. And like I mentioned with passive diffusion, normal concentration gradient is going from high concentration to low concentration. That's the natural gradient that everything likes to follow. Here, we are going against the concentration gradient because we're going, instead of from high to low, we're going from low to high, which is the opposite. So we're going against the concentration gradient. So here, I got that right down there. Can I get someone to read this slide for me, please?
Yes.
Go for it.
Active transport, using energy to move particles across a membrane against the concentration gradient from low to high. Examples, protein pumps that use ATP or sodium potassium pumps, moving molecules against a concentration gradient from an area from lower condition to an area of high concentration always requires energy.
Okay, thank you, Brennan. So we're talking about energy with active transport, right? So you notice here, we're going from a low concentration to high concentration requires energy. Now, this is important because this powers a lot of important processes, specifically your muscles and your heart muscle. And we'll talk more about that when we get to body systems. But for now, we're wanting to look at the mechanism for how that works. So you see here that we're going from low to high. And to do that, you need to have energy. That's really the biggest distinction between passive and active. We'll dig in more into active tomorrow, but I wanted to kind of go ahead and show you what that looks like. And I'm glad Zaria brought up her question where we're seeing the opposite happen with passive. It's no longer something being nice and slow going down as concentration gradient. Here we're seeing something going against, and it takes work. It takes energy to go against the concentration gradient. Okay, so let's do some practice real quick. Looking at this picture, is this showing an active or passive process? How do you know? So in the chat box, go ahead and tell me if this showing an active or passive process. How do you know? Ooh, Zaria, thank you for the extra information. She says cells use active transport to get waste or important molecules out of the cell to build outside the cell, like a plant cell building its cell wall. That's fantastic information. And like I said, we're going to talk more about active transport tomorrow, and we'll definitely talk about stuff like that. So again, in the chat box, what I'm looking for is this showing an active or passive process? How do you know?
It's gotta be an active.
What makes you say that, Brandon?
Because I'm seeing right here all these red dots, they're passing through each line. But right now it has 3 big green dots and 3 medium yellow dots.
Mm-hmm.
So which means an active could be like, it's very active, but it's not passive.
I don't think so. So first off, the green and yellow things aren't doing much anything because they can't get through, right? The membrane looks like it has very, very tiny holes, and so the yellow and the green are too big to fit through those. So what you should do is you should look at the concentration and try and figure out where there's more of the red. Let's see, Josiah says this is a passive transport because it is going from a high concentration to a low concentration and is moving smoothly through the cell membrane without energy. Fantastic, Josiah. That is an amazing response. Brighton says this is showing passive process. I know this because the red molecules are transferring into the less concentrated area. Oh, brilliant, Brighton. Right at the beginning, there's nothing over here on the right side as far as the red concentration goes, right? So it's very concentrated on the left, and it's going from a high concentration to a low concentration. Brian says passive because it's going to the right. Good enough. Zaria, passive transport because small molecules move through the cell membrane with ease. Very good. No energy required, so that's how it's passive process. Alan, I think that is passive because it's going from high concentration to low. Fantastic. Looks like you guys are slowly getting it. Good job.
Basically,
So
basically, I think it's going like, I don't know how to say it, but I think active is going to the left, and I think passive is going to the right.
I think you might be thinking a bit too hard, Brandon. Why don't you go ahead and read this over here and let us know what you think.
All right. Passive. Tiny red dots trying to find, what is that word?
Equilibrium.
Equilibrium by moving across the membrane until they are even on both sides from high to low concentration.
Very good. So does that make sense or is that confusing?
Still confusing.
So it's a passive process because if you notice at the very beginning, there's a bunch of red on this side, right? And slowly the red dots start to move over to this right side. So they're going from an area of high concentration where there's more red to an area of low concentration where there's less red. And it keeps moving across the membrane until it becomes equal on both sides, which is what the equilibrium is referring to. So there's no energy being expended. This is like a natural kind of thing, just the same as putting food coloring in water. The molecules are trying to find a balance between both sides. That's what makes this a passive process. Okay, so now let's go to this one. Is this showing an active or a passive process? How do you know?
I think this one is inactive because it's flight or floating through the air.
That's true, but in terms of concentration, what do you notice? Is there more on the bottom or on the top?
More more on the top, less on the
So,
bottom.
so this is a high concentration up here, which means down here, this is a low concentration. So if it's going from a low concentration to a high concentration, is it going against the concentration gradient?
No. Yes.
I think so, right? Because normally you'd go from high to low. Here we're going in the opposite. We're going from a low to a high. So if we're going against the concentration gradient, it looks like we're using some kind of special thing here that's requiring energy. That's what that flash is happening down here. Do you think we're dealing with an active or a passive process?
It's gotta be a passive.
If we're using energy,
Sorry, it gotta be inactive.
there you go, active process. This is a good time for me to remind you guys that if you are not reading your CK through 12, that I would highly recommend it, especially if you feel like you're feeling a little lost, because the CK through 12 reading also has videos and practice questions to kind of help you with the information. So I think we're currently in Unit 2, 2.11 through 14. Anyway, so let's see, I read something by Cameron. Cameron said, active because it is going from low to high and is using a protein channel to provide energy to go against the concentration gradient. Very good. Now, it's important to remember, especially on the star, just because there's a protein doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be active or passive. You really have to look at the concentration gradient as well as energy being used. So here you see this thing coming. This is a little ATP energy. So this is powering that protein to open and close. So the protein can be facilitated, it can be active, it just depends on the presence of energy. And we're going against the concentration gradient, going from a low concentration to a high concentration. So very good. Thank you, Cameron. See, Nathaniel also says active because it's moving to a highly concentrated area. Very good. Zaria says active transport. By the way, I love this model. Isn't that cool? Looks cool, huh? If you look over here, you can also see other stuff in the membrane, which I like a lot. And you notice how it's fluid, how it's kind of moving around. Whenever we're looking at these pictures, it looks so static. But this is more what it's like. It's very, very fluid. All right, very good. Looks like some of y'all are getting it. Good job. Okay, so active. Molecules are moving through a pump from low concentration to high concentration. That's how you know that it's active. Okay, very good. So we're going to talk more about all the different processes tomorrow, but we've already covered pretty much everything. Basics of active, osmosis, diffusion, facilitated diffusion. So we're going to revisit this again tomorrow, and we're going to make another foldable. So get ready for that. But for the time being, if you haven't finished this, make sure you finish this tonight. Let's go ahead and move into our exit ticket because it is a little bit longer. And I want to make sure that I honor your time and give you plenty of time to work on it. So we got a little less than 15 minutes. Give me a second and I'll put the link to the exit ticket in the chat. I'm sorry this was kind of content heavy, but again, this is very high yield content for the star. So I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to discuss it. Okay, let me get the link.
Is it in the chat box?
I'm getting it right now. Here we go. Okay, it is posted in assignments. Oh, I didn't post it in assignments, did I? I forgot. Let me go ahead and post it in assignments as well. I know that some of you prefer to click it there. So I'll go ahead and put it there. Okay, so I just published it on Teams, but Teams does take a bit for it to load up. So if you're having trouble with the chat box, just wait for a little bit and the link should pop up in your assignments pretty soon. But thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for listening. I know, like I said, it's a lot of information all at once, but don't worry. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. So we can definitely nail down these concepts because they will be definitely on a star. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We will have tutorial after intervention on Thursday. So like you've been noticing with your other teachers, we have intervention for a little bit, and then after that we have our tutorial. So intervention is from 2:45 to 3:20, and then after 3:20 to 4, we have tutorial time for you to ask questions and any of that stuff. Yes, Denise, of course you can. I encourage you to take the eggs ticket as many times as you can because I want you to get to that 100%. Because like I said, this information is very important to know for the STAR. And I think I can probably stop my recording now.